Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us once again for another Teal Talk Live on Thursday. This is actually our final segment for the month of April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we're glad that y'all joined us throughout the month, and we are excited to say that we will be bringing Teal Talk Thursday to you once a month after April. So we look forward to hearing from us in May as well. We'll have more information about that topic at a later date. But today we have with us our friends from the Penquis Children's Advocacy Center to talk a little bit more about their work. So we have Wendy and Taylor and Becky joining us today. Thanks y'all for stepping in and sharing with our community and our Facebook friends about the work that you do. It's really important. So we're glad to have you here. So why don't we start by just explaining what a Children's Advocacy Center is? Maybe, Wendy, you could talk a little bit more about what it is and our history and where this theory came from.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having us. I know we're all excited to be here. My name's Wendy. I'm a forensic interviewer and a program manager here at the Penquis Children's Advocacy Center. Children Advocacy Centers started a long time ago, over 20 plus years in Huntsville, Alabama. If you go and you look at the National Children Advocacy Center in Huntsville, you'll be able to see a lot of resources down there. But the idea came from a vision, basically somebody on the prosecutor's office who wanted to set up a place where a kid only had to be interviewed once. Typically what was happening before that is when there were allegations of sexual assault, you'd have law enforcement that would interview the child, Child Protective Services, and then several other people. So this kid's being put through several interviews, and then you may have a caregiver, a family member that's not getting much assistance or help or services. So it was really disconnected and disjointed. So from there they thought, why don't we try to come up with a place where a kid and a families can come just once, the kid can be interviewed, that caregiver can get some services for themselves and the family. We can bring law enforcement there, we can bring the DA's office, we can bring Child Protective Services. They can watch the recorded interview and be able to ask questions of that forensic interviewer when the interview is going on. When that interview is happening, a family advocate being working with that caregiver and follow up and add some extra assistance. So Maine followed up with that and started a Children's Advocacy Center in Maine, and there's several Children's Advocacy Centers located throughout the state of Maine that are connected to different counties.
Awesome. And Wendy, I know it's the Penquis Children's Advocacy Center, but specifically what areas do you tend to support?
We cover cases that we cover cases from Penobscot and Piscataquis County. We also sometimes we refer to them, we'll be able to help other CACs, and I'll use CACs as a term for Children's Advocacy Center, maybe that are in adjoining counties because it's closer for the family to travel to Bangor or Dover. We do have a satellite location in Dover, which we're very proud of also. So those are the places that we will support and work with.
Wonderful. That's awesome. So it's really a service that's accessible, it sounds like, to families wherever they're located in the state of Maine. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah, correct. There's centers in southern Maine. There's soon to be some in Washington County, northern Maine. We all work very well and closely together and keep in close contact, and all have very similar protocols that the Maine Coalition Against Sexual Assault, MCASA, oversees and is part of. So I'm very proud of the work that we do together.
And just to define a little bit, MCASA is the Maine Coalition Against Sexual Assault. For those who haven't joined us before, we've talked many times about the coalition and how they support us, and it's wonderful that they also support all the children's advocacy centers as well. Can we talk a little bit about what the process looks like and what type of, I know you said you support children who have been impacted by sexual violence. Can you talk a little bit more about how that comes to you and how the referral is made or what it looks like? How would one know that this was a place that their kiddo would go?
Yeah, I'm going to turn that over to the family advocate, Becky. She's a great resource in answering that question.
Sure. So here at the CAC, we get our referrals from the Department of Human Services, law enforcement, and or the DA's office. So that's who's calling us at any given moment to get the families in. We have an intake sheet that I fill out with them over the phone, and then we call all of our partners to, try to get as many people to the table that we can for the interview.
Great. That's wonderful. And so how is it that a parent would sort of prepare their kiddo for coming to an interview? Like, what does that look and sound like?
I think Becky's also another good one, just because Becky's
Sure.
I hate to be picking on Becky, but
I
Becky
know.
basically will follow up with that caregiver and
Yeah.
talk to them what to expect. So go ahead, Becky.
Yeah. So prior to the family coming in, as part of our intake process or referral process, I call the family, talk with the caregiver, a little bit of what to expect when they come in here, reassure them that it is a safe environment. It is, super hard circumstances that we're meeting people. And, we try to make it as friendly and just as, secure and stuff as we can. And then when they do arrive here, either myself or our other family advocate, Brittany, we give them a quick tour of our space just to acclimate the family and the child. I feel like that uses their mind a little bit. We show them the interview room. Depending on the age, we pick how we, explain things. But yeah, so they get a little tour, and then we settle into the family room and wait for everything to happen.
Okay.
I also feel like we go a little bit one step further in regards to explaining things to the caregiver. And Taylor, I don't know if you want to talk about the pre-meeting that we have with that caregiver.
Sure. Yeah. So, hi everyone. Taylor again. If you're seeing me again from the Human Trafficking Talk, glad to be here once more. I'm another forensic interviewer here. And what Wendy's talking about, like a pre-meeting, what happens when the family comes in to the Children's Advocacy Centers after they meet with Becky and kind of get a tour of the place and kind of stay in our family room? We'll bring the caregiver into what we call a pre-meeting. And in that pre-meeting, they're going to meet with the forensic interviewers, so either I or Wendy or both, whoever's there. They're going to meet with detectives who are on the case, Child Protective Services who might be working the case as well. So they can finally kind of put a face to names they may have heard or not met yet, which is really awesome because I think in a lot of ways that provides a lot of relief for these caregivers. In that process, during that time, we kind of go over, with the caregiver, what's exactly going to happen, that they are going to be in the family room with Becky, who's a great resource for anything they may need with anything regarding medical referrals, legal referrals, counseling referrals. We partner with a lot of other programs that caregivers can get information from Becky on that they can sign up for. And when their children are seen with us, they go to a top of many wait lists, which is a huge help in this area. We also describe the process of, these members in this room that are meeting with you now are going to be watching the interview take place, and that it is recorded. And that when we're done with the interview, that recording then is burned to a DVD. We don't keep any physical copies, and that those are only for Child Protective and law enforcement and district attorney's office when we get here. So it's very secure. We try to answer all the questions that caregivers may have and try to put their minds at ease as much as possible in this type of situation.
Oh, that's great. A question that I have that maybe you could answer as well, Taylor, is so would a caregiver sort of be privy to that information or what's shared in the interview? Like, what I hear you say that there's a DVD. Would the caregiver be able to view that DVD, or would they know about the information that was shared and what their child disclosed? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So along with the pre-meeting, we also have what we call a post-meeting after the interview. And this is where I don't want to get too confusing, but at the end of the pre-meeting, I always tell caregivers, we're going to meet with you one more time after the interview. We're going to bring you back in here. During that time, please come with any and all questions that you may have. But at this time, me and Wendy kind of bow out. and that we turn it over to law enforcement, district attorneys, child protective services, and give them the space to ask those questions. And I always give them kind of a warning that, it is an active case. There are things going on in the legal system, child protective service policies, and things that you may ask a question does not mean you're going to get your questions answered. And that's just to keep, the case protected and clean, to make sure they can do the best job possible for your child, if they are seen by us for their case.
Great. Becky, could you talk a little bit more? I understand the process is sort of the family comes in and you give them a tour, and then they sort of return to what we call the family room,
Right.
and then wait for sort of that pre-meeting to happen. Once the pre-meeting is over and interview started, could you talk a little bit about the supports and the services that you provide to the family that Wendy mentioned earlier as being the family advocate? What sort of happens with that caregiver while they're waiting for the interview to happen?
Sure. So during the interview, the family or the caregiver is in the family room with me or Brittany. We have a family folder that we give out to all families that come in that provides a lot of just pamphlets of different, useful information to them, as well as a contact sheet with our phone number and any partner that's involved in the case. And, we can go over any resources they might need. We can do counseling referrals for not only the child, but the entire family that might need it, that's attached to that child. We work closely with Pine Tree Legal, CHCS, UCP of Maine, Spur Wink. Oh, I know I'm leaving people out. St. Joe's. And so, we're talking about all those things. And if a family, some family members come in with their own trauma, and so we're getting resources for that. And of course, we work closely with Rape Response Services, and we are able to help them navigate that as well by having an advocate sometimes come to, be in the family room with us while we're in there, or we can make the referral after, which is always super helpful to have that extra person there.
Yeah.
I would like to, in case any of our partners might be watching this, just give a huge shout out to them, because they are definitely all very much appreciated. We couldn't do what we do without them.
That's great, Becky. Another question that comes up sometimes when thinking about the Children's Advocacy Center is, it's wonderful that we have this space that is child-friendly and that is really comfortable for families and kiddos, but this is also really subject matter that is hard to talk about, especially for young children. So what does it look like if you have a kiddo that comes in and doesn't want the interview or doesn't want to talk? Can you speak a little bit more about, how you support that kid or what it looks like for that family if their child isn't interested in having a conversation?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that one. So sometimes we know that kids are reluctant for various reasons. We don't ever want to press a kid to talk or feel that a kid needs to talk. What's great about the Children's Advocacy Center is it's the kid's choice on what they say and what they don't say. Sometimes kids have gone into that interview room and they don't want to talk about it, and they will say they're not ready to talk about it. And that's good, and at that point in time, the interview's ended. It's documented that they're not ready to talk about it. Sometimes we may have kids, also younger kids, because we work with kids developmentally aligned between 4 and 18 years old, that may not be ready to go speak to somebody in a room separate from their parents. So we have some interviewing tools, to help with that, so that it is successful for that child. We've had kids that come back. Typically, kids may get a few years older, and we may have seen them a few years ago, and now they're ready to talk. So what I really, really like about it is it gives the kid back some choice. It gives them choice to whether or not they want to tell their story or not. I think that's the best thing.
Yeah, and I would like to add with that. I mean, it's one thing I tell Wendy is, it's unfortunate that this job exists, but I'm glad that it's around for these kids to have, because I do believe this is the best way for kids to have the space to feel free to talk. And if they choose to or not to, that's on them. And it was their choice to do that.
Yeah. I'm sure that feels really empowering. And I imagine that you have probably see kiddos come back even after they sort of say, I'm not comfortable, because you did give them that autonomy to say, this isn't what I want right now. And so giving them back that power that they sort of need is probably helpful if they do decide they want to come back, that they know they have the opportunity to say, this isn't what I want. So certainly appreciate that.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to mention about the yarn we have. So sometimes we have reluctant children who might be just a little shy to leave the room, younger kids especially, leave their parent in the family room with me. And we have this extremely long piece of yarn that stretches from the family room to the interview room so that the child can hold one end and the parent can hold the other, and they can tug on it just to feel that security of the parent being there. And I just think that's really cool. And I would say 9 times out of 10 works. I feel like I've only seen it not go so well one time.
Oh, that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
I think sometimes just feeling that physical connection with your parent can make you feel safe.
And you can tell they're tugging on it at first just to test it, make sure the parent's paying attention.
I'll say the first time I got to use that rope in an interview, I kind of laughed because the kid walked with it, like strutting down the hallway, all excited, and sat down in that chair and looked at it and went, yeah, and like threw it. And so I was like, all right.
Yeah, maybe it was more for the parent than the kiddo.
Exactly.
What I also like about the fact that when kids come in for an interview is we're very transparent and honest with them. We let them know that there are 2 cameras in the room and that there are people watching in the other room. We may take a break and check in with them, or they may come in on the door and knock. Sometimes kids want to meet who that MDT is, and that's done on camera. So again, we're very transparent and very open to the child and what's happening here at the CAC.
That's wonderful. I think sometimes, there is that, balancing that desire for kiddos to feel safe with also being honest with them. And, what we find is that they can go hand in hand. You can be honest and that can feel safe for them. So that's really great that they have that control and understanding of what's happening when they're there. How long, can you talk a little bit about what the interview typically looks like? And, you're trained forensic interviewers, and that can sound like a whole interesting title. So can you talk a little bit more about what that is and what the trainings are that come with that, and what the specialty is and what those interviews look like?
Yeah, I'll start if that's okay, Taylor.
Absolutely.
So I've been interviewing, it will be in July, for about 4 years now. And I attended a training that was put on by the National Children's Advocacy Center in Huntsville. It was a week-long course of basically following their protocols, and use the same protocol for every interview. There are some deviations in some situations where things may change up a little bit, but it's that same type of protocol: non-leading, non-suggested, open-ended questions, some rules, some rapport building, some closure to it. I've also taken some advanced training. I've also attended some trainings as a multidisciplinary team on child sex trafficking, done some stuff online. We're constantly training, just learning what new techniques are out there. We're also including our multidisciplinary team members in some of those trainings also. But the interview itself is pretty standard in regards to going through that same forensic interview structure sheet. I don't know what you want to add, Taylor.
Yeah, I would just add, I've only been doing this for a short while. My prior experiences from my home state, New Mexico's law enforcement. So making a transition, one thing I've found going through the training and doing everything that Wendy discussed and following that protocol is really also looking at you kind of get an appreciation when you're one-on-one with these kids in a room, a chair apart, and you can start to look for minor details, facial expressions. You kind of look for certain things, and it's not to be like, oh, this kid's lying to me. It's more to make sure they're comfortable. I think Wendy and I can both talk about times when we've gone back to meet with MDT partners and, maybe they want like a certain question asked, but we'll kind of be like, it's not a good idea. I know on screen it looks like this, but in that room they're struggling a little bit. So it's an ability to go more in depth with, I feel like when you just say like, you just got to make sure you're actively listening, that I don't think that's enough. Because that's definitely what you're doing, but there's more to it because you have to pick up on all these kids' age ranges that you just met, and you have to be able to see their comfort level and see what can I talk to them about, what should I never talk to them about again almost. It's kind of those things where it's like we mentioned earlier with it being child-friendly and child-focused, we want them to make sure that they're in control, that we don't push, we don't pry, like Wendy was talking about. And I think that's a big part of those forensic interviews.
It's also hard, just I'll speak personally about for the interviews that I do, it's very difficult just because we can't take a side on things, and very much in regards to the forensic interviewing practices, if a child says something and they want to know if it's okay if they've told, or how do you as an interviewer feel about it, we can't react to statements like that. So it's a very unique practice in regard to navigating those waters so that it's non-leading and non-suggestive, so that from this DVD it can be given to law enforcement or DHHS to see if it does go forward, for prosecution. And Becky sometimes will be able to help out in regards to if a child's had a difficult time in that interview room, to be able to speak with that child when that caregiver's in for the post meeting, and help that child have some closure and give them some additional resources if teenage years for rape response services, teen folders, things like that. Our lovely journal coloring book that was put together recently, it's awesome. So I feel like we work really well as a team, and we navigate really efficiently so that there's the best outcome for that child and that family.
So Wendy, you talked about once the interview is complete, you sort of pass that DVD on to either law enforcement or child protective or the DA's office. Can you offer any clarity about what is the process after that? Like, how is the DVD used, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So if the DVD is going to go forward for prosecution, typically what happens is it's not a quick process. Law enforcement has one shot at this, and I know it's got to be frustrating as a caregiver knowing that somebody has hurt your child and they are still out there. But I can assure people, law enforcement's doing the best job that they can in regards to trying to figure out the best way to navigate and who they're going to be talking with next. So it's not a quick process. I've seen it, and I've watched law enforcement talk about it several different times. Sometimes it can take up to a couple of years before things actually get to prosecution, if it gets to that. Something also to keep in mind is just because a child's gone through a forensic interview at the CAC, it does not replace that child's testimony. So what happens is if it were to go forward for prosecution, say you have a 7-year-old who's now 9 years old, they're going to now have to talk about, something they talked about 2 years ago in a courtroom. So it doesn't replace that. What typically has happened with that DVD is that DVD can be used in regards for plea deals. Sometimes they'll think, that child may not be ready to testify, but we want to be able to do something. So we're going to use that forensic interview where a child gave a very detailed disclosure that includes maybe sensory and different details that they can use and say, hey, this happened, and let's talk about this, let's talk about a deal for this.
Great. So going back to the interview, how long does an interview usually take? I imagine it takes a little bit of time to build that rapport with the kiddo, and like Taylor said, learn, what it is that their body language is giving off, and understanding, what it is that they're feeling comfortable to talk about. What can you say about how long it usually lasts?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. I've noticed it really depends also on age range, right? You can have a 3 to 5 year old, and they're not going to want to sit in there with you as long as maybe a 15, 16-year-old does, right? So that kind of comes with the balance of, what can I do? What can I ask? How can I get where the MDT members need this child to be at in the best way possible without breaking like our own rules of not pushing and, not doing so directly. So to answer general time, what I like to tell parents is it could be 15 minutes, it could be 2 hours. We don't push these kids into a time zone. We let them talk, we let them say their piece. I've had kids tell me in the room after a while, go, well, I think I'm done. And it's kind of like, well, thank you for talking with me today, And so it's just one of those things where to put an exact time on it, I don't think it's really possible. You want to give the child the space and time that they want. Granted, like I said, we do have to get some questions asked and we try to navigate those waters best we can. But at the end of the day, we work with that child's comfort level and we don't go beyond that. What do you think, Wendy?
I think that's a great answer, Taylor. It's really hard. I mean, sometimes we'll have teens that will talk for 30 minutes. I've had a 5-year-old that talked for over an hour. So, I mean, I think it just all depends where people are at and what they have. And sometimes there may be, if, there's a lot of things to talk about. Sometimes there's something called an extended interview where a kid may come back within a week to 10 days and they may talk some more, because I know when I ask a lot of questions over 2.5 hours, it's kind of draining, and I can't imagine, having to answer those. So it's time for just a little bit of a break and, to come back within those 7 to 10 days and, asking that child during that time, are you okay with coming back? Again, child's in the driver's seat, and making sure that those things happen.
And those extended interviews are great. I haven't done one yet, but watching Wendy do them, it's incredible to see these kids come back within those 7 to 10 days, because it's almost like a refreshing, almost like, okay, I'm glad I'm back because I'm glad I forgot to tell you this, or we didn't get to talk about this last time, but now I'm ready to. So those are really awesome to see.
That's great. So one question that we're asked a lot is, it's challenging with kiddos, and sometimes parents feel like they don't know what to do when a kiddo discloses. It's, as a parent, it's very, lots of times feels mixed. Of course, you never want your kiddo to be in a situation where this type of thing happens to them. But could we talk a little bit about, like, what could a parent do when their child discloses? Where do they go? Who do they call? What is, best case scenario? What sort of avenues do they go to? I know you talked a little bit about the referral process, but what does it look like for a parent to reach out and receive support when their child discloses sexual violence or sexual assault that happened to them?
Becky, do you want that, or do you want me to take it?
I think you do a very good job explaining that.
So if a child discloses, making a report to local law enforcement, or calling DHHS, I think listening to what that child has to say. I imagine it has to be difficult hearing those words come out of your child's mouth, but trying not to, ask a lot of questions, just to be able to listen, assure them that they're safe. If there's some sort of medical care that needs to happen, going to Eastern Maine Medical Center, St. Joe's, Mayo, any of those places for care is also crucial. Because there are nurses that are trained there to be able to provide those exams. But I feel that those are the appropriate things to do is to make those reports. And typically what will happen is when our MDT partners, such as law enforcement or DHHS, gets those reports, they may go out and meet, with that caregiver, speak with that caregiver, or do just minimally get some eyes on that child. But from that point forward, it will usually land here at the CAC, where the family advocates such as Becky or Brittany will be calling to schedule. So.
How quickly does that process tend to happen, Wendy, when it goes from, child disclosing to getting into an interview?
It happens rather quickly. We've had some cases that we've had children disclose, and then within an hour to two, they're here at the CAC.
Wow.
So there are other times, just depending on scheduling, because we like to get as many of our multidisciplinary team partners here so that they can ask whatever questions are needed for their investigation. It may take a day or two, but it's rather quickly. We try to fit people in and accommodate. Becky has a difficult job of accommodating all the professional schedules and finding what works best for the caregiver and child. So we try to meet that need.
I also just kind of want to add, as much as we provide a safe, space for the kiddos that come in, it's also a safe place for the parents. We want them to feel, as comfortable as they can, because it's super traumatizing what they're going through. And, depending on their history or even what's going on, if it's a family member that's offending, that's really difficult for, parents and other family members to deal with. So a lot of our time in the family room, I feel like, is spent, just kind of supporting that parent in that way as well, and making sure that they get the resources that they need to not only take care of themselves, but then be able to, adequately support their child who's also going through this trauma as well. So it can get pretty emotional at times because of that.
It's very difficult, especially, if it is a parent, and you've got those two parents that were living together under the same roof, and now that parent has now been asked to leave, and that parent may be providing financial support. There's lots of avenues that the other parent is now going to have to pick up and figure out. So I feel like, just being able to, listen, as Becky said, listen and be able to work with that is an important piece. And I feel like there's lots of supports and resources through the CAC, through our partners and through Penquis, that we're able to offer those families at that point, just to be able to help them get what needs need to be met.
That's great. I want to come back to that, Wendy, because I want to hear a little bit more about those resources what they are. But before we move from that, Becky, could you talk a little bit about how you sort of, what can a parent do to prepare their kiddo for coming in for an interview? What do you share with them about how to prepare their child, what to say, what to bring, and sort of how to make sure that it's as successful a process as possible?
So it gets really tricky around when parents ask me, what do I tell them? Because it's, we don't want them saying, oh, you're going to see a doctor, because we're not doctors. And we have had that happen. I tend to go with, just let them know that they're coming to talk with someone who talks to kids every day, and it's safe here. And just sort of, if it's a situation where the child has talked to the parent even minimally, it's a little easier, because they can say, remember what we were talking about? Well, you're going to talk to another person who's going to help you with this, that sort of thing. As far as stuff to bring, we have in the family room books, some toys. We have a bunch of snacks. But if kids have like a special stuffed animal, especially the young ones, or even older kids, if they had a special fidget thing or something, certainly whatever's going to make them comfortable is what we want them to bring.
Okay. And I've heard you refer a lot to non-offending caregiver, but I'm sure when this sort of circumstance happens, there are a lot of non-offending caregivers that sort of want to provide support to that child. What does that look like for the family coming in? Is there sort of guidelines for who should come and what that should look like?
Yes. And I think this has been my biggest upset of COVID times, because if it's, two parents that want to come support a child, because of COVID restrictions, we have to only allow one of them to come in, which I just feel bad saying that, because, if they both want to support, it's just hard. So yeah, usually it's, parents, it could be, it has to be a legal guardian to sign our consent to record for the actual interview. But we have some creative ways around getting that signed if that legal parent or guardian cannot be here. And in that respect, any family member could just bring them. But we try to keep, at minimum in the, in our space, just it helps just to keep everything a little more calm, because everyone's emotions, obviously are running pretty high and at different levels at different times. So I always mention about, the helplines that we talk about with Rape Response Services, Partners for Peace, those types of places. I'm always saying it can be for anyone in your family. Anyone can call anytime. It's not just for you because you're here and here's an extra brochure, like that kind of thing. So it's, I put that little plug out for that too, just because it is important that families know that.
Yeah, that's great, because it is really, sexual assault in general terms affects more, like there's this ripple effect, and it impacts family members and loved ones and communities and workplaces and so many other people. And so there are services and supports out there for them too. So it is important to know that, and certainly glad that you share that information. So can we come back to what does resources and supports look like? We talked about counseling referrals and referrals for legal services, but I think the Children's Advocacy Center does a great job ensuring that those gaps that you talked about, where the offender might be filling, that we can step in and provide that support so that the family has a little bit less to worry about. Can you talk a little bit more about what some of those look like?
Sure, I can do that. We have a COVID fund, one through Penquis for families or people that have been affected by COVID. So there is an application for that. Sometimes we may have a situation where we may have one caregiver who is a primary caregiver, and basically that's what they did. And then the other one was employed in the community. That primary caregiver is now the alleged offender, left the house, so now there's no care. A person has to work. There may be some COVID restrictions around, kids getting into daycare or things like that. So, making that application through Penquis to that COVID fund to see exactly, if they qualify for any of those services. That's one. Secondly, I feel like another great thing that we have access to, MCASA with the Good Shepherd's Food Bank of Maine has been able to provide us with snacks. Snacks are great. A lot of kids, especially during COVID, they weren't getting the nutrition that they were getting when they were at school and they were home. So a lot of them were missing food. And so to be able to think about it is, you're going for a job interview on an empty stomach and not having food in that belly, it's not going to be as productive. Not going to feel as good either. Want to be able to make sure that those kids are fed. So we have a fridge here that was donated. We also have some food that is donated on a monthly basis by Good Shepherd's Food Bank. And we also have another piece of that is a Hannaford gift card. So if a family has experienced food insecurity, that's something that the family advocate will ask about. They can leave with that Hannaford gift card, so we can assure, that there is a little bit more food that's going to be going into that household. We also have some emergency funding. Also, that's through MCASA that can cover some other needs. And there's also a trafficking fund. So I feel like the public doesn't know a lot about these things, but I feel like we at the Children's Advocacy Center and with Rape Response Services and MCASA is able to navigate a little bit more of this world and be able to help these families. We also have some housing assistance in regards to Penquis has housing here, being able to Becky's work before us was in Brittany in regards to seeing what's out there for housing. I feel like there's just a ton of stuff here. It's just a good thing.
That must feel really wonderful for a parent who is, having these struggles with their children, to feel like there are things that they don't have to think or have to worry about. And it's so great that, the Advocacy Center, where you think you're bringing your child to, talk to an interviewer about this horrific thing that's happened to them, and you're going home with food and resources and supports. Like, what a relief to not have all of those other things to think about. That's really incredible, and I'm grateful for that opportunity to have those resources available.
I look at it as kind of like one stop. You can get whatever you're willing to get at this point. And I like the fact also that the family advocate, Becky and Brittany, are able to fill out those referral sheets and send those over right away to those agencies. And then, they're able to think about trying to get an appointment. I know how difficult it is myself. You're going to be you're not doing that. You have somebody else that's doing that for you, and they're going to follow up to make sure that appointment's taken care of. And then they're going to follow up with that caregiver 7 and 30 days out. And, if there's a need after that, we'll sign a release and go a little bit further. So I just feel like they're not alone, even though the interview is done, and they've come to the CAC, there's still a lot of follow-up services that can still happen.
Yeah. And I know a lot about how Rape Response Services and Partners for Peace, comes into the fold and provides those supports as well. But Becky, maybe you could talk a little bit more about how that happens for those who don't know.
Okay. You're referring to you like I did today, keeping you busy. So we, when we're talking to a caregiver on that initial referral, we do offer or ask them if they would like to have additional advocacy here. As Wendy had mentioned, for the family advocates, we follow up at 7 and 30 days. And I always tell people to, please just call me anytime. Like, I certainly don't mind extending that a little bit. But when it comes to appointments or court appearances, things like that, that's just not something that we do. So that's where we bring in our friends from Rape Response or Partners for Peace. And it works pretty seamlessly, I think. We get a pretty good flow going. And if even when the parents are a little unsure, I don't push it, but I try to sell it to them a little bit because it's just super helpful. I find it to be very helpful when we have teens in, because we can have someone that can advocate for that teen as well. Sometimes we have a couple advocates here, one for the parent, one for the teen. So, a lot of times we're making those referrals that, ahead of time of the interview. And then sometimes they're not sure, and that's okay too, because it's happening fast and furious and they just can't think of everything. And when they come in, I have all the information in our family folder. I go over it with them, remind them to call the helpline if they need to, and we can certainly make referrals from that point as well. And sometimes we've even called and gotten someone to come in because they've gotten here and been like, oh yes, I really would like to have someone here. So it always seems to just work out however, really well. So we're fortunate that we're able to do that, I think.
Yeah, that's great. It's a little trickier with COVID, but we're lucky that we have advocates that live nearby. Yeah. That always helps.
I also like the fact that just because we aren't open 24/7, you got that warm handoff to one of those advocates. If there's something needed in the middle of the night, they can, like Becky had said, that helpline, and they can be able to have that contact. Because sometimes I feel like there's questions that they may forget here, or they just may say, yeah, this really bothered me, or something along those lines.
Yeah. And I think it gets confusing for families too. Like I said, it's fast and furious at times. And, I'm on the phone just trying to get them in here, and sometimes just need to slow it down and explain, like, there's all these people. There's a family advocate, a sexual assault advocate, a domestic violence advocate. And they get confused easily. And I don't blame them for everyone having a similar title. And why can't just one person help me? So it's great when they realize that, like, we all have a role and we're all here to support and help them. And yeah.
That's great. So I imagine you talked a little bit about the helpline that's available 24/7. I imagine that probably after the interview and after the family leaves, the family would, or the caregivers would probably want to be aware of what to anticipate. Can you talk a little bit about, how you talk to families about what to look for and what to anticipate from their kiddo after an interview?
You're talking to me, I guess. So yeah, I do actually get that question sometimes. What will happen after? Because they're just it's so a gamut of reactions. And I usually tell parents it really varies depending on the child. I have seen children come in from that interview and you can literally see just everything come off their shoulders. Just physically, they look lighter and they come in like nothing happened. And I tell the parent, if they don't want to talk about it, I wouldn't bring it up. That's my advice usually. Just go at their pace. And if they bring it up, proceed with caution, because if it isn't, the investigation's still going, you don't want to hinder that in any way, but just be supportive and listen more than talk, I guess, would be my biggest thing. And I have talked to parents that, at the 7-day follow-up, oh, things are great. And then by 30 days, well, they had a little bit of this and that. And that's all normal as things like settle down and come up. And like I said, everyone's dealing with their emotions at different times. And a lot of times the kids that come in, especially the older kids, they're ready to talk and they've kind of dealt with it in their head, especially if they're in counseling, but the parents just new to the scene, so to speak. So it's just, I think it's great. I think we have a good, the team as a whole really helps them navigate that and all of them that way.
That's
great.
great.
And I think a lot of the times too, we get in the post meeting, Wendy and I and officers and attorneys and everyone, we'll get the question, we're going home. What, should I be listening for anything? Should I be on the lookout? What should I be doing this? I think, 10 out of 10 times we're going to tell you, just listen, like Becky was saying. And I think as a parent, it can be really hard to do that sometimes because you want to go into protection mode, which is completely understandable. But this is, I think, the best time where your child is trusting you enough to open up to you. That's so huge. So to make sure you just listen. I try to tell people if it's an active case, you may just write down a time and date and what they said. Mm-hmm. That might help law enforcement, if they say something that they didn't talk to us about. Mm-hmm. Just having that documentation handy, but don't push, don't pry like we say we don't do. I know it's tough, but, just active listening, that could go a long way for that child just to be like, I'm trusting my mom and dad here to open up to them a little bit more, and it could do wonders.
Yeah. And I know with all survivors that we support, what I mean is survivors of all ages, sort of, sometimes they're looking to you to see how you're going to react and how you're going to respond and if it's safe to keep going. So sometimes it can be a matter of just, being supportive and saying, I believe you, and, just being that listening ear so that and then they'll figure out okay, this person I can trust and give you a little more and then see how you respond. So it is a hard place for parents as they want to protect and be safe. And, it's hard not to get really upset, but, I imagine that can really impact how the kiddo feels about it too. If they see their parent being upset and they want to keep their, as much as the parent wants to keep the kiddo safe, the kiddo tends to want to keep the parent safe too, I think sometimes.
I will add too that sometimes if the child, in between things, if the child has come back into the room or there's multiple children in the family room that are waiting for that one that's being interviewed, we do have other space within our office suite that, either myself or the rape response advocate, whoever's here, can bring that parent in separately to have a more private conversation and let them, I like that because it allows them to be able to have their own emotion about it in that time without the child hearing and seeing what they just need to get off their chest as well. So we do try to accommodate those moments as well.
Great. So we are getting low on time, and there are a couple more things I want to talk about. The multidisciplinary team, we've referred to that a couple of times. Wendy, maybe you can talk more about the multidisciplinary team approach and what that looks like as a cohesive team and how that functions within the Children's Advocacy Center.
Yeah, we have a multidisciplinary team throughout Penobscot-Piscataquis County that is comprised of local law enforcement, child protective services. We also have, as part of that, we have some mental health services on there. So I feel like together we all function. We meet monthly. And have just a check-in meeting or a multidisciplinary team meeting. And then we also have our case review the end of the month where we'll review cases. And we're always learning through the cases that come to the CAC and learning from our multidisciplinary partners. But I feel like we're very well supported. without their support and without their help and input, we wouldn't be where we're at today. I enjoy working with each and every one of them that come here. So I don't know, Becky, if you want to talk a little bit more about what that looks like also, or.
I feel like you covered it. I just think the world of all of them that we work with. They make our lives easier in dealing with this. I feel like we all are going through this little journey together, and it takes a team effort to make this all happen. And I feel like even in the most chaotic moments, it goes smoothly.
Yeah, and I feel like too, they all bring different unique perspectives to it, but everybody's common goal is that child and that family. Nobody deviates from that. And it's just awesome to see everybody like come together so quickly and everybody wanting to help and what can we do to help.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Also, sorry, I just was looking at the questions. So, Amanda.
So we have a question
Yes.
from Facebook. If an out-of-state family is visiting and needs supports and services, would that be something you would be able to provide?
Yes, typically as long as there's a referent. We do also do something like out of catchment where we've received referrals from other states. Basically, a family is now living here in the area, though the alleged crime may have been committed in another state. So as long as there is a phone call from law enforcement or child protective, even if it is in another state, we've answered those calls and we figured out ways to make that work.
That's great.
And we have had a couple instances where a child's visiting here from another state, but it's happened here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That too.
That's great. If there are any more questions from Facebook or Instagram, please feel free to ask away and we'll try to get those answered before the end of our time together. I would like to take a couple of minutes just to address the beautiful handprints behind you, Becky.
With my computer. I don't know if you can see very good, but that's some of them. Did you want me to mention it?
Sure. And
okay.
then I think we have a little video that
So it's one of my favorite parts of my job. Once the children have finished their interview, they have the option, if they would like to, do a handprint. It's finger painted handprint on a piece of fabric, and then they can decorate it if they choose to. And we have them hanging up in the family room, and then, as you can see, over my desk a little bit. And it's just really cool to see. They get super excited, some of them, about doing it. But it's just a really nice, thing to do at the end. It's something positive. I enjoy my time with the kids then because we're talking about just whatever kids like to talk about. And sorry, some of them will decorate it. They'll put "be strong." We've had, some of the teens have put some pretty powerful messages on some of them. So I know when we have tours or people see them, it can be a little bit emotional for people, but usually it makes me feel happy because I know that they've come in, they've told their story, they felt empowered enough to leave that with us, and they felt really good doing it. And that's my memory of it. So I just always like to point that out to people that it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure for families and parents, or caregivers, seeing those handprints hanging helps them feel not quite so alone, that there are other families out there.
And when kids ask, I tell them that. If they say, "What are those? Well, who's are those?" And I'll say, "Oh, those are other kids that have come in and talked to us, and you can do one at the end," and they get really, happy and excited about it.
That's super cool. I think we have a video that we wanted to share about the handprints.